All right, we are ready to get started. Hello and welcome to today's webinar on building student voice through SEL. My name is Rachel Escobedo and I will be your moderator for today. Before we introduce our speaker, I would like to mention a couple of ground rules. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted in 24 to 48 hours. If you have questions for our speaker, please feel free to use your chat box on the GoToWebinar control panel. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Angela Karem. Angela Karem has an MA in Education and Curriculum and Instruction and is currently a transitional kindergarten teacher in the Chula Vista Elementary School District. Angela is a third inaugural Sandford Teacher Award recipient. With nearly 20 years of experience in education, she was chosen for her continued enthusiasm for teaching and dedication to creating meaningful learning experiences for her students through engaging social emotional learning curriculum such as the Sandford Harmony program. Welcome, Angela.
Welcome all of our participants, and good morning. Thank you for having me. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day, your busy life, and focusing on building that student voice, which is such a core part of education. And we're going to look specifically through the lens of the social emotional curriculum to build that student voice. But before we get started, let's take a poll. I'm curious to see who's joining us today. So what's your role? Are you a primary elementary teacher like me, a secondary elementary school teacher, a counselor, or an administrator, or something different? Go ahead and let's take that poll and find out who's joining us today.
If you could please submit your response via chat. We'll read them out loud shortly. All right, looks like we have a number of school counselors, administrators, we have a Harmony trainer. Welcome. Oh my gosh, we have a lot of people. A fifth grade teacher, district PBIS coach. Again, more school counselors, we have some more administrators.
Oh, I'm very excited about that. In particular, the school counselors, the PBIS, and the administrators, because from a teacher's perspective, when you're sharing that power and you're letting go of that power and giving your students that student voice, sometimes it can be a little vulnerable, and sometimes taking those risks, moving away from scripted teaching, for instance, making mistakes, you need that support. You need the support of the counselors. You need the support of the administration to be able to be vulnerable and open up your classroom to the experts in the room, which is, in fact, the students and their student voice. So I'm really excited that we have some administrators and school counselors. So thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about how to build that student-teacher relationship. And I'm going to show you some wonderful resources via Sandford Harmony. And then we're going to talk about practicing the student voice, not just the students practicing the student voice, because that collaborative work, exploring through their collaborative work and partner work is really, really important, but so is practicing as a teacher. The teacher needs to practice letting the students use their voice too, and then we'll talk about expressing their student voice via their specific talents and through academics and social emotional curriculum. So let's start by talking about building that positive relationship with the students. Now, what's in our locus of control as teachers is this relationship that we're building with our students. And building that teacher-student relationship is paramount because we are the venues to create that safe, respectful, and inclusive environment. We are what drives that in our classroom community. And much like asking our students to learn even when they're hungry, or if they're scared, or if they are not feeling comfortable in their classroom, they're not going to learn. The same thing is going to happen in expressing their thoughts. They're not going to be able to express their thoughts or use their voice if they're not feeling safe or respected or included within their environment. So when we form those strong relationships and support that autonomy and give them venues to really use those voices, students are more likely to recognize our legitimacy as like an authoritative figure, and then absolutely turn us over into trusted individuals within the classroom. So trusting those, building that trust is going to be paramount. So I've listed some things for you to think about when you're building that trust, but I really want to talk about just a couple things, because again, the locus of control for us is building that relationship, and building the trust comes from our transparency. So for instance, one of the things that you can do to build the trust is telling students about yourself. One time in my classroom one year I had a population of military students, and so I shared a quick story about how my oldest son would stuff the toilet with toilet paper when his dad, who was a Navy SEAL, was deployed. And he would do it over and over and over again, and we didn't understand why. And then one time, he finally fell on his back and said, "Mom, please don't fix the toilet. Dad will fix it." So he was trying to put something in his control, which was try to get his dad back. And so we realized, he was feeling very powerless. And when I shared that story in my classroom, what happened was really amazing. Yes, the students that had military families, they knew exactly what I was talking about. It's very powerless, knowing that the person you really want to rely on is away from your house and you have no control. But it also opened the floodgates to lots of stories and lots of relationships being built. So me being transparent and telling students about myself was what started all of that. Another thing you can do is to keep that positive learning classroom culture by having them learn to trust each other as well. So for instance, you can say things like, "Javier, I like it when you are there for Addison," so that they can look to each other also to start building that trust. Plus, being vulnerable and opening up your classroom to these expectations I have listed, they also just kind of embody that openness and trust. So you're building that trust. So some of the resources, and we talked about building trust, but some of the resources that I'm going to show you from Sandford Harmony are the second component that is in your locus of control, which is your voice. And I call it teacher talk. Now,
All right, can anyone hear us now? Okay, we're having an audio issue. So sorry about that, everyone. Angela, keep going.
Okay. So what I was saying about the storybooks, and I don't know when I lost you all, but I do want to just recap about that storybook, because in the storybooks, like I said, if you're reading the storybooks, you have those everyday moments and those discussions and activities right there at your fingertips in every book, behind every chapter. That helps you use your voice with your students, so then they can use their voices also with their buddies or within that classroom discussion while you're reading the storybook. So you have the teacher talk in the lessons and activities plan book. You also have it in the storybook. And then in the upper grades, in 3rd grade to 6th grade, you also have the research and relevance at the beginning of every unit, and you have everyday moments at the end of every unit. And let me just show you that one too. So here is the upper grade activities and lessons book. And right here is the research and relevance for you to read to kind of get yourself in that thought process of your own thoughts about what you're about to teach social emotionally. And then at the end of every unit, there is the everyday moments. Okay, so it gives you reminders of how to bring that in those student voices at the end and beginning of every lesson. So now I'm going to start talking about the things that the kids really enjoy, which is the practice component. So we talked about the student-teacher relationship and how important it is to build that trust, and how Sandford Harmony gives you multiple ways to look at building that student-teacher relationship and making that a healthy component, and thinking about and reflecting on your own talk and how to talk to your students. And now we're going to talk about practicing the collaborative and partner work. So letting them actually use their student voice. So one thing that Harmony does that is fantastic to use it within your classroom is they do something daily, which is a buddy up and a meetup. So the lessons and activities that I was showing you are your actual lessons, but the meetups and the buddy ups are what you're going to use every day. And this is really where the kids are going to practice their student voice, and where you're going to let them practice their student voice. So the buddy ups is, as you can see, here's a grid of my buddy ups in my classroom. It's really important to be strategic and purposeful, and Sandford Harmony's program is just that. It's strategic and purposeful. And as my buddies are actually right front and center, so that they can always see that they're important and they're an important part of their class, and they can also see that they're going to get a fair turn with everybody in the classroom. They're literally going to buddy up with everybody in their classroom. So here's some buddy ups in action. Now, we change out the buddies weekly. Like I said, that's strategic and it's purposeful, so that they get a chance to be with every student. And so even the students that might not really want to be buddied up with somebody else, by the end of the week, because you've done multiple activities all week long, they're usually smiling, or at least it's amiable, but unlike how it started in the very beginning. And I want you to notice in the very middle picture, they're actually doing an academic activity. And even that is done with smiles, because they've spent that time doing some social emotional activities and lessons where they get to express themselves. So that expression, that fluidity of student voice, it really does become more fluent. And it also gives you time to practice letting them use their voice, because again, it's not just practice for the students, it's definitely practice also for us teachers. So here's one way that you can manage your buddies. So my grid, and this slide is a little off, so I apologize, but really it's literally just a table. It's a chart with all of the kids and all of the lines, so that what you do is you have all of the names of your kids on one side and all of your names of the kids along the bottom. And then when you buddy up kids, for instance, Anna and Max are buddied up, you're going to just check it, or I usually put a dot. But you're also going to check Anna and Anna, because she's not going to obviously be buddies with herself. And then once you've gone through all of your students and they have all had a turn with each other, then you can be a little more relaxed about your buddy systems. And because the kids have had a fair turn with every single person. And I also show my students the buddy grid so that they know I'm taking the time to really care about every single one of the students getting a good, solid chunk of time with every student. And that kind of also helps negate any problems for students that don't really want to buddy with another buddy. They know they're going to have another buddy next week. So now on to the meetup. Now this is where you're really going to have the chance to turn the power over to your students. You're going to be able to share that power in of running the classroom and all of the learning and the teaching. You're sharing that time with your students, and I'll tell you how and why in 1 minute. This book, which I showed you at the beginning of Buddy Up, is also what you use for Meetup too. And this is going to give you all the information you need. You're going to want to have it close by in the first few weeks of your school year, but then you won't really need it. You'll get into that pattern because again, it's daily. These meetups and buddy ups are things you do daily to give the students their voice. So you want to keep it around for maybe a substitute teacher, but you won't need it after some time. Now, what's great about the meetup is you're creating these harmony goals together. So your students are using their voice to create the norms within your classroom. Now, they're not rules. What they are is, in fact, norms. So a rule would be no running, but a harmony goal would be something that they can always strive towards, like being a good friend or solving a problem, so that you can point out, oh, I really like how, Javier, you solved that problem with Addison. I really appreciate you working hard to be a good friend for her. Those are 2 of our harmony goals at your meeting. Way to go. And that just takes just a couple of minutes, and you're using those words that they've given you. So that student voice is up. It's always visible in your classroom, and the kids have ownership. I highly recommend letting your kids sign the harmony goals too, so they see their names are up there. They're taking, again, that ownership of it. My kids are TK students, so you don't see their names up there, but the other picture is a first grade classroom, and so all the kids have signed their names on the harmony goals. And then I know you're the masters of your ships, teachers. You know how important circles are, but I just want to reiterate how vital that getting up in a circle is, because we express ourselves in ways that we rarely do. We bring our best selves to circles. And then the perspectives and facts and stories shared in a circle, they cultivate that empathy and influence the behavior that happens within your classroom community. So the more you circle up, the more you're creating that. So the power too about that circling up is done in the meetup. And I'll tell you, this is so powerful because it is, again, strategic and it is purposeful. And the 2 strategic parts in particular are the community check-in and the sharing and the response. So the 4 parts are greeting, community check-in, share and response, and quick connect. The greeting is just that. You're going to do a greeting around the circle. But you can utilize this time to make sure every student has their name said. So you can have them say, good morning, Jacob. Good morning, Ben, etc. Or you can have them do a high five or a fist bump. In my classroom, I do that little physical touch. They can choose a fist bump, a handshake, a pat on the back. For us, that helps us open up the day. But the community check-in and the sharing response is the valuable time, because you're going to turn the power over to the expert in the room. You're going to turn that power over to the students. So for the community check-in, you're going to check in to see how your harmony goals are going. So you're going to want to have your harmony goals relatively close and ask the students, has anybody seen a high? Somebody following the harmony goals, or has anybody seen a low? And what's so cool is, yes, of course, you'll have highs to share. But when you get a low, for instance, Jacob pushed Benjamin on the playground. That was a low. So if a student brings that up, then you get to put that power into their laps, and the students get to use their voice into how to fix that, how to solve that problem. Because as a teacher, you give up that meeting, you give up that circle up, you give up that power, and the students decide how to solve that problem. And what's great about that too is they bring their buy-in. In other words, they're solving that problem together as a team. So if something like that happens again out on the playground and there's no teacher's voice out there to stop it, they've got all those other voices that they've all agreed upon to help solve that problem. So because they did it together. And then the sharing and response, again, is very strategic and very purposeful, because you're going to choose who shares and who does the sharing at every meetup. And I always do it visually, so I put it up on the calendar, or I put it by their name cards, so everybody can plainly see they're going to get a turn for the meetup. Because some people, they can't wait, and they all want to share. But some students, I should say, but if you've got it in plain sight showing that they will in fact have a turn to share, sometimes that helps. And it also sometimes creates anxiety in some kids, and you have to be respectful of that too. But the sharing and response gives each student a chance to share with the entire class. Now, what you can do is pull a conversation card to ask that student a question, or you can just have them share something about them, something about their weekend or what they're looking forward to. That is actually very fluid and up to you. And then the is just a circle. We do Zoom, and then we throw the Zoom all the way around the circle, and then we do a hands in. It's going to be a great day. But the quick connection and the greeting are really kind of up to you. Again, you can pull a quick connect card, and the quick connect cards are one of the best things ever from Harmony. They come just like this in a box with the sets of cards. There are actually 3 kinds of cards, but as you can see, this is a picture of the quick connect cards in my classroom. I have gone in and gone through them, which I highly recommend, but I've also separated them into the community builders with materials and the community builders without materials, and the collaboration cards with materials and the collaboration cards without materials. And then, of course, you've got your conversation cards. Conversation cards are what you use in buddy ups or meetups. So I did that because some days and some weeks I have the time to actually do a community building activity where I have to prep with materials, and sometimes I don't. So then I can just pull a quick card from the community builders if I don't have time to prepare with materials, or if I want to make it more in-depth because I know my students need to get more dialogue in. They need more voice right now. As a teacher, you've got your finger on the pulse of your classroom. Sometimes you need those deep community builder activities for that social emotional engagement, for them to use their voice. Then you would use those cards with the materials. So I highly recommend going through and separating the cards in a way that works for you. And now we're going to talk just briefly about ways we can express our student voice. So we talked about how critical the teacher-student relationship is, and it needs to be a positive and open and vulnerable one in the beginning, because the payoff comes tenfold later. And then we talked about practicing it through meetups and buddy ups and a partner work and collaborative work. And so now I want to give you just some venues for student voice. I did just a little litmus test on my school community to see what other teachers were using, and they gave me quite a few ideas here for things they use for students to be able to use their voice. And I thought I would talk just a little bit about the classroom jobs, because again, the strategic and purposeful planning of the jobs is another important role. And I gleaned that from Harmony. I used the same grid system that I used for my buddy ups to do my classroom jobs. So that's a fair and equitable way for the kids to be able to be a part of their classroom community and use their student voice. But Sandford Harmony has some amazing ways for the students to express their student voice. I already showed you the lessons and activity book, which has 5 units for teaching the students about social and emotional curriculum. And those 5 units are very valuable, and they're, again, very strategic and very purposeful. They start with diversity and inclusion, then move to empathy and critical thinking, and then talk about communication, problem solving, and then peer relations. And all 5 are very valuable, and as a practitioner, it unfolds really nicely throughout your school year. So if you're starting with Unit 1 in the first quarter, and then moving on to the Unit 2 in the second quarter, they actually coincide perfectly with the way a class bonds together as they're moving forward through the year goes. And then also the Quick Connect cards They have upper grade and lower grade, early childhood and upper grade quick connect cards. And these are, like I said, one of the easiest ways to pull in that social emotional component into your day, especially if you have just a couple of minutes to spare, and then you pull out the cards and the kids immediately, their mood changes because they know they're about to do something fun. And then there's the Caterpillar thought questions, the wise conversation cards. These are games that Harmony created that are actually really fun and enjoyable for your students and you too as a practitioner. It's an enjoyable part of your day too when you pull out the games. And then there's really purposeful games like Battle the Bullies, and then the People Match game. And then Harmony gives you all the components you need to play these games so that they're using their student voice with each other, learning from each other, and enjoying themselves. And it's all easy to use. All of the game boards come in a nice, neat packet, and all of the components you need, Harmony gives you. So all you have to do is quickly pull them out to give the students time to use their student voice together and express themselves with their classmates. So now I would love to hear from you. I've done a lot of talking, and I know you all have wonderful ideas. So let's open it up to some discussion. Any questions? Please feel free to send them in.
All right.
Let's look at some questions.
So one person asked, if you have a student that is reluctant to use, or what if you have a student that is reluctant to use their voice?
Well, that's going to happen. I don't think there's ever a classroom where you don't have a student that's reluctant to use their student voice. And it can happen for many reasons. Those are usually the students that need it the most. So I would say start by focusing on that student-teacher relationship. Be as vulnerable as you can with that student and sharing things about yourself and asking things about themselves, and just take the time. Know it's going to take some time, but take the time to build that student relationship. So use those teacher talks from the lessons and activities. If you have a student that you know you just need to help them open up their voice, go to that book, go to your lessons and activities, look at the research relevant ones, and look at try this today's. Maybe there's some great ideas you didn't think of to talk to the student about. And slowly over time, if you keep doing that, and I like to write their names in my plan book too when I'm planning my lessons and activities for my social emotional curriculum. When I put their name in my plan book, it keeps it on my radar that I need to talk to this person and try this today with this person. And over time, slowly over time, when they see that you are the one that is in control, they can trust you, they are respected, they are safe, and they have an environment where their voice is important, it will slowly happen. So I think patience is the best answer for that. And like I said, being strategic and purposeful with that student pays off later on. They'll open up their voice.
Perfect, thank you. All right, we have a lot of questions coming in, so we'll do our best to get them all. All right, so one person asked, how long does a lesson usually last?
That's a great question. So the lessons vary. So the wonderful thing about Harmony is that because they vary, you can use them to your discretion. So they can be for 5 to 10 minutes. Like I said, you could do like a collaboration with the materials and make it a short one, or you can go into the lessons and activity and it could be as long as 30 to 45 minutes long. The lessons though are really well written and they actually flow really well in between when it's called lessons and activities, because they are learning, but they're active. All the lessons and activities in the units are done well so that they keep the kiddos engaged. So it's actually very fluid. You can use the longer lessons and activities, or you can have a shorter one.
Thank you, Angela. Here is a very specific question. How do you like to introduce this kind of material to groups of students who are really active or only want to play games/sports?
Okay. So yes, those are definitely challenging. So I introduce it on their terms. If they're active and they want to play and they want to be up and moving, then that's how we do our circle. For instance, the meetup doesn't have to be sitting down. You can be standing in a circle to do your meetup. And also brevity. Brevity is important. Keeping it positive is also very, very important. And saying what you want to see. So for instance, if they're being really, really active and they're not as engaged as you like, capitalize on the ones that are engaged and tell them they're doing what you want. You're saying what you want to see, and trying really hard not to say what you don't want to see. And that's tricky. That takes practice. But I would say meet them where they are. Definitely keep the lesson and activities very active, because you can always slowly turn it down as you get their engagement and as you get them to participate.
Okay, thank you. And again, apologies for the audio issues today. Let me just repeat the question that was before. And Angela, you already answered it, but if someone wants to hear it again. The question that was asked was, how do you like to introduce this kind of material to groups of students who are really active or only want to play games/sports? So that was the question she just answered. All right, let's move on to some more questions. What do you say to teachers who have said they don't have time for this?
That's a great question. My initial answer is always, you have to make time for it. And here's why. It's true. You do need to make time for it. You do need to put it in your plan book. But the payoff is tenfold down the road. So if you're carving out little bits of time in the beginning to throw in a meetup, to throw in a buddy up, or throw in maybe 1 or 2 lessons, the kids are starting to build those relationships, and more importantly, build their student voice. So the ownership and the power of learning is kind of moving to them. So your role kind of shifts back a little. So you'll find, believe it or not, that as you move forward, once you've started introducing social emotional curriculum into your classroom, as you move forward, you'll have more time later. And then that can be more time for academics, more time for even more social emotional learning. But the truth is, you do need to carve out a little bits of time. Now, having said that, be gracious with yourself. If you only had time this week to do 1 lesson and you meant to do 2, then flexibility is the name of the game in teaching. If you meant to do a buddy up and a meetup in 1 day and you only got to the buddy up, for instance, wonderful, at least you did the buddy up. So I would say just be patient with yourself, but do get out your plan book and put it in there, because at least if you do that and you don't get to it, you can move it to next week and it's on your radar. And I, again, can't encourage you enough about the payoff at the end by starting it now.
Thank you, Angela. All right, another question. So this person's asking, our principal wants me to find 3 ways teachers can use Sandford Harmony in their classes. I'm not sure what to come up with since it's well laid out in the books.
So your principal wants you to find 3 ways you can use Sandford Harmony in the classes. It is laid out very well in the books. So I would recommend to just use what's in the books. Maybe you write it up in a way that fits the time frame better, or maybe you amend the lesson a little to make it either meatier or less time consuming, depending on what the needs are. But I would say feel free to go off of the books, because the research behind the books has been, all that heavy lifting and all that heavy footwork to find out what works has been done. Those books are well written and those lessons are amazing. So I would say definitely use those, and go through the Quick Connect cards too. And they'll either spur your ideas to maybe create your own. So you could do that. You could come from the Quick Connect cards because they have wonderful ideas. But I would also say just reach out to your administrator, reach out to your principal, and clarify kind of what they would like to see, because Harmony in and of itself is a terrific vessel for that social emotional curriculum. And like I said, it's already written and it's ready to go.
Great, thank you. Next question, do you ever provide a pre-post survey to gather student voice in meeting your goal of building community or developing positive character behavior? Or sorry, character development.
Okay, so do you ever provide a pre-post survey to gather student voice in meeting your goal of building community or developing positive character development? I would say that would be super useful to use with the students to help turn that power over to the students. I have not done that. I mean, I've done something similar. I teach TK, so we do a thumbs up and a thumbs down, basic yes or no questions when we're doing our surveys. But there's one thing I've found school-wide, the surveys give the students so much power. They feel so powerful in expressing their student voice through surveys. So it's a fantastic idea. And I think that would help tremendously, being really transparent with the survey results too with your classroom. I think that alone would help push that positive character development. So yeah, I would highly recommend that.
Next question. All right, let's take a look at our next question. For a student with selective mutism, I think autism is what they meant. Can you let them represent themselves in pictures or charades where the other students try to understand what the share is trying to say?
I think you're onto something amazing. I love your idea, whoever you are. That was awesome. Yes, because selective mutism can be frustrating for teachers. And goodness knows it's frustrating for the student with selective mutism. I had a student, and we went the whole year without her saying anything to me. And her mother would take videos of the student talking to show me that she actually did talk. But yeah, selective mutism is very real, and it's can be crippling for that student. So the more creative you are, and you already have great ideas, the more creative you are about letting them express themselves, the better. Because student voice isn't just talking. Even though I was talking about how teacher talk and talking to ourselves is really important, it guides us as adults for sure. Their student brains are way more fluid about expressing themselves than we are. So they naturally gravitate towards all kinds of expressions outside of student voice. So yes, the more you can do with he or she that doesn't take voice, the better.
Thank you. Next question. So you may have already said this, but what are the first steps to get started?
I would say the very first step is for you to familiarize yourself with the curriculum. So you have your lessons and activities, which is literally the lessons, and then you have your daily activities, which is your meetup and your buddy ups. Those are things you're going to do with your kids daily. So I would start by just getting to know the book. For instance, I showed you the research and relevance page, which oftentimes gets looked over, but it's great teacher talk for yourself and teacher talk for your students. And then get to know those quick connection cards too. I would say that's a great place to start as well, because they are literally just something you can pull and use without even opening any books. You can use it right away. It's usable with your classroom. And to be very honest, you could just do that for a while just to get to know the curriculum. You could just keep pulling your quick connect cards and do your meetups and your buddy ups. And when you feel more comfortable with the curriculum, then you can start putting in those lessons and activities.
Thank you, Angela. All right, some people are asking if her presentation will be available Yes, it will. In 24 to 48 hours, you should receive a link to her presentation so you can download.
And can I add also all the resources I showed today are on the Professional Learning Library. They're all digital, and you can access them just by registering at sandfordharmony.org.
Okay. And another question is, where do I go for these resources?
So the sandfordharmony.org Professional Learning Library is where you go, and it's just literally sandfordharmony.org/PLL. So once you register, and it takes just a couple minutes, literally, then you have access not only to everything I showed you and more, but you also have all of the training. You have videos to help you implement this curriculum, to help you implement your Meetup and your Buddy Up. You have the lyrics to all the music. And the music is something I could talk about for a long time because it's so well written and it is so powerful. All of the strategic and purposeful words in the music alone is just amazing. But all of it's on the Professional Learning Library, and that's at sandfordharmony.org.
Thank you, Angela. A couple more questions. How can school counselors support teachers using this program?
So school counselors have a job that gets a little more fluid than teachers. So you can actually use the Harmony curriculum in many ways. So if you're pulling small groups, for instance, you can do some of the lessons and activities in your small groups. If you're pulling individual students, you can start up your dialogues with the conversation cards. School counselors can also get themselves very familiar with the lessons and activities because, again, the heavy lifting has been done. Lots and lots of research has been put into the writing of these lessons and activities. So it does take a while to get yourself familiar with it, to become fluent in Sandford Harmony. So a school counselor knowing the ins and outs of the curriculum would be so helpful. And they can go in and support by demonstrating a lesson maybe, or explaining some of the lessons. Just having that knowledge of Sandford Harmony and being somebody that a teacher can go to as a quick resource if they have a quick question would be very powerful.
Okay, we have one more great question. What if my admin is not supportive of SEL lessons and wants me to focus on academics?
Well, there's where a strong positive relationship with people really pays off. Because like I started the webinar saying, having the admin support, the school counselor support for social emotional curriculum is really vital, because the social emotional curriculum is very personal. It can be very vulnerable, and it's not always easy to implement, because of those two things. So if a principal is not wanting you to focus on social emotional and wanting you to focus on academics, I would say have them come into your classroom. Because just like I was saying about not being able to teach a student if they're so hungry they can't focus, you can't teach a lesson to students who are not engaged and not focused. But when you've built up those relationships and that rapport with the social emotional curriculum, the academics actually flows easier, because your students are engaged in what you're saying and they're engaged in what each other are saying. That student voice is built up, so that respect is built up. And so you're able to get in more academics. So if that's not possible and you can't invite your principal into your classroom to observe, then I would say do take the time to meet with them and just state your case. And you can also access information on PBIS websites, on MTSS, and just the value of social emotional curriculum and the research behind it is starting to just flow out there. So I would say educate yourself a little bit and then meet with your principal or invite them into your classroom to see the value.
Okay, thank you so much, Angela. All right, unless anyone has any other questions, we are going to move on. I just want to thank you all today for joining us, for taking time out of your busy schedules to listen to this amazing presentation with Angela. She has so much experience, so many tips to provide you guys, so we try to bring her on as much as we possibly can. Angela, do you have any last minute tips or recommendations, advice for our audience?
Yes, I would say for sure, check out the website, the SandfordHarmony.org professional learning library website. It's just a plethora of resources for you as an educator. And then I would also say enjoy, have fun, and really build those relationships with your students, because that's why we became teachers.
I love it. That's so sweet. Okay, so this webinar is going to close shortly, and once it launches, a survey is going to launch, or once it closes, a survey is going to launch. We really appreciate your feedback. Again, many apologies for the technical difficulties we had today. But we would love to hear feedback on our content, on our webinar series. It really helps us make better webinars for you in the future. It's very short, it's only 4 questions. And again, we appreciate your time. And with that, I'll let you all enjoy the rest of your day, and please stay tuned for our next webinar in March. Take care, everyone.
It would have been cool to see all of this.